right, this is the third in a series on science and religion. And I've tried to make the point in this series to make a connection between materialism and atheism or faith in God. So I'd like to back up and give a little bit of the history of materialism and modern atheism in the West. Materialism, remember, is a metaphysical belief, the ism on the end of that word, materialism. In other words, it's a philosophy. John Locke, a 17th century philosopher and physician, was someone who took a materialistic position as a Christian. So it's possible to be a materialist and still be a believer. But materialism is not only a philosophy, materialism is also a method. For example, how many have heard of Isaac Newton, the great scientist? Of course. Isaac Newton practiced methodological materialism, but he was hardly an atheist. He believed in a creator behind the wonderment of the world. 17th century French materialism evolved out of a French mechanical view of nature. And then French materialism, beginning in the 17th century, developed as a protest against Roman Catholic oppression and the French monarchy. In other words, so French materialism begins as an ethical, political venture. Some of this will eventually support atheism in French culture. For example, a publication I'm sure you've all read, Theophrastus, read De Vidibus.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The modern European atheism, in other words, was political. It did not arise because of some revolutionary new discovery in science. Materialistic atheism was born out of oppressive and corrupt political systems supported by a powerful and equally corrupt religious hierarchy. Again, it was not from some truth of science, which I think some people have the misconception. The materialism evolved or developed because something in science suggested that only matter existed. In other words, it wasn't that. By the way, anybody recognize that formula? That's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Or it didn't come from that. So it wasn't science that led to materialism. It was politics. Now, so a materialistic view that only matter exists, that excludes God, again is a metaphysical position and a matter of faith. You can base your materialism on science, but science does not prove or even require a commitment to materialism. Some believers, as I mentioned, like John Locke, were materialists. But to be consistent, God would have to be a corporeal being. In other words, the product of a material universe to be a materialist. Jesus of Nazareth said, God is spirit, and referred to God as creator. So it would be somewhat problematic. Now, as I've mentioned, there is a growing consensus among scholars, scientists, philosophers, suggesting that materialism is not working. It's not helping us explain the universe as we now understand it scientifically. The American philosopher Thomas Nagel, a non-theist, says materialism is surely wrong. The scientist Rupert Sheldrake challenges materialism as a set of very problematic dogmas that we have been handed. I think he mentions 10 dogmas that materialism bases itself on that we essentially accept or believe in as a culture. And he challenges those, again, as are a growing number of scientists. So one has to believe in materialism without substantial proof, against growing evidence that's challenging materialism. And materialism was used in some places, as I said, in the 17th century to not only criticize religion, but some of it grew into atheism. But the new atheists criticize many of us for believing in God without evidence. Now, I find that somewhat problematic itself. So let me turn to some of this science and its implications for faith. The last time I mentioned Robert Lanza and his new book, and his interpretation of the role of human consciousness in the production of reality, including the universe, I mentioned an example that he uses, that one's kitchen does not really exist outside of our conscious awareness of it and our observation of it. In fact, it's demonstrated that, for example, all the color that you're seeing right now, there's no color out there. The color is in our brain. So, whatever color this shirt is, I'm pretty bad with colors, that's being produced in your brain. It's in here, not here. Now, he carries this, extrapolates this to even talk about the reality of the universe or our kitchens. Now, I can't go that far with Lanza, who's a medical doctor and a pretty bright guy. The kitchen, I think, does exist without our perception of it, as well as the universe. I can't go all the way with Lanza because, even though he might be right, I can't go all the way because his interpretation comes from the influence of Eastern philosophy, Advaita philosophy, as much as it does come from quantum theory. I don't know if he realizes it. He doesn't seem to notice that his theory of biocentrism is not a scientific theory. It's not a falsifiable theory. He's interpreting the science using, again, the philosophy of Eastern philosophy, Advaitism, and Shankara's theory. Shankara said, Brahman satyam jagam mitya jivo brahma na paraha, which means, well, Mike can tell us, but I'll go ahead.
The cows are mooing.
It simply means that Brahman alone is real, the world is illusory, and you are no different than Brahman. Now, that's not my interpretation of modern science. I don't think that I don't accept that philosophical position as a Christian. I do believe we have a creator, that there is a separate created world. But here's the thing. Science has created an environment in which this type of speculation is possible. You can actually do that, as Lanza is doing. Now, some people believe, as I mentioned, that all of these things will be answered eventually by science. I don't think so. I think the world, after 100 years, the world is more mysterious now than it ever has been because of science. And I don't care what science discovers, as I mentioned, religious folks are going to give it a religious interpretation, whether it's from the East or the West, or us Christians giving it a Christian interpretation. It's not going away, like it or not. Now, for example, Einstein, whose material realism made it very difficult for him to accept what he thought was a ridiculous idea coming out of quantum theory, which he helped invent. it was called entanglement. And Einstein accepted locality. He was committed to an objective physical reality when it comes to the world. But entanglement theory really troubled him. It was the idea that if you take two photons and they separate as twins, and they can be billions of light years away from each other, and when one is observed, they both instantaneously materialize and one impacts the other. Billions of light years away instantaneously. And he just said that's impossible. So he and a couple other physicists at the time got together and wrote their own paper on this, challenging this. It's called EPR theory. He simply couldn't accept it. He thought it was false. But Niels Bohr and others proved, in fact, it was true. And Einstein was proved wrong. Now, I know it's very difficult to accept that. Something that's incredible. What if two photons were 6 feet away from each other and instantaneously, without any understanding of how they communicated with each other, instantaneously, one impacted the other? That would be hard to imagine, right? No locality, one not touching the other, no sense of any energetic field necessarily touching the other. But billions of light years away, what kind of universe are we living in? An open universe. One where this type of speculation is possible. A wonderful, mystical universe that, as I've mentioned, has opened the door for God talk. Now, scientific facts like this confound our sense of reality, no doubt. Our modern concepts of reality have been constructed and prejudiced by materialism. And with little or no room for a loving creator characterized by spirit and justice. And in spite of generations of big brain Homo sapiens sapiens testifying to a transcendent reality, to something beyond this physical reality, we're asked to believe that the wonderment that is our universe and life is an accident caused by random natural events. That takes some faith. We accept the myth of random chance to get a universe like ours, an earth like ours, and conscious life, even though it defies mathematical probabilities. For example, you know, mathematicians have worked this out. Anybody read Moby Dick? Okay. There's a line in there that simply says 15 letters, call me Ishmael. So what would be the probability of just randomly, let's say if you had chimpanzees, typing on typewriters? Just kept typing on typewriters until you would get these 15 letters that would say, call me Ishmael. How long do you think that would take? A couple hours, a couple days, a couple weeks?
Years.
Years.
36 trillion years. So talk about job security for chimpanzees, huh? 36 trillion years. Now, how much more complex is the human eye?
Oh, yeah.
And some of the other wonderful things about our universe. And listen, that's what science is saying. So I don't feel all that intimidated about placing a spiritual being we call God as instrumental in having a wonderful universe like ours. Okay, next week I'm going to talk about recent research on the paranormal. So be prepared to have the hair on the back of your neck stand up.